It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Rebekah Louisa Smith. Hi, Rebekah. How are you?
I'm good, Doug. How are you?
Doing very well. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. You are the film doctor. That's one of my takeaways from your...
That's right. So I work in the film industry predominantly, and what we do is we help our clients create successful film festival campaigns to get their films seen on the festival circuit. And my company is called the Film Festival Doctor because I am a doctor, not of medicine, but of PhD. So I have a film and audience research PhD.
You can actually get a PhD for that, huh? Wow.
Yes. Yes, you can. It goes into philosophy because I was looking at, I was actually doing researching in film audiences, and I was looking at how Tarantino's fans respond to his films emotionally because they're quite a passionate bunch of people. And I was looking at if the way that they respond is the way that people believe they respond in the theory books, and it turns out it's not. There's a lot more stuff I discovered that is really groundbreaking stuff. So that was back in 2011 when that was written. So it needs to write enough. I was to write into another book, but it's certainly got some good stuff in there.
Well, one of the things that I found interesting is I do a lot of interviews with indie filmmakers.
Oh, yeah.
And they all have the same issue regarding distribution and regarding getting their films out there and seen. With the advent of digital, it has totally turned the industry upside down, changed the whole playing field, leveled it pretty much, where they're really competing against the major Hollywood studios. The only difference is that the Hollywood studios have the distribution locked up. And it's very difficult for the indie films to get seen and to get out there. So what do you do to help them?
So to get them seen out there, you're right. It is very difficult for independent films with no big budgets or big stars and big selling points to get seen. And the way that I help them resolve that problem to get their films seen is I get them on the festival circuit. So their films get seen far and wide, win awards, and get recognition. So, for example, an indie film that's a bit of a gem that might have a great story but no stars and, like a smaller budget, but still a gem, we help them get their films seen and out there on the circuit. And we do that by putting together the best festival plan for the film and get it seen worldwide. So it's kind of like an alternative distribution for the film. So without having to rely on getting it seen on Netflix or something, which might not happen for the film, we help them get it seen a different way on the festival circuit, which is a very important platform to get a film seen.
How many film festivals are there in the world?
Well, nowadays, when I started doing this back in 2010, there was like 400, 500, but now there's, I think there's about 9,000, and some of those are online, but either way, there's a lot. And then obviously there's only like a big handful, shall we say, now the ones which are the key ones to get what you want achieved. But there are other great festivals as well that are a bit smaller but can still get exposure. So they all have good plus points, really. Some of them, can be a bit up and down, but you know which ones they are quite early on. But there's a hell of a lot more. So a lot more choice, but also, a lot more to figure out and maneuver as well at the same time.
Well, Cannes is probably the biggest one, right?
Yes. Cannes is the biggest one, closely followed. It's kind of almost like they're similar, but closely followed very closely by the Berlin Film Festival.
Oh, all right. And then where does Sundance fit in there?
Sundance is also in the top tier. So the top tier tend to be Sundance, Cannes, Berlin, TIFF, that's a Toronto International Film Festival, Tribeca, Venice. All of these ones are kind of like launchpad festivals as well. So they're big. The other
one I've heard of is South by Southwest, I think.
Yep. That's a brilliant festival. That is also like on the verge of like the big tier ones. I mean, not, people have different perceptions of what the big four are, but it is a big, big, great festival, perfect for filmmakers launching their films. And it's a great community vibe in Austin, Texas. Really, really good vibe and a great festival. So that's a really, really good one.
Is there a particular genre that film festivals want, or is it open to all genres?
It's open to all genres. The key thing is that the story and the execution of the story is different from the norm and the mainstream. So the festivals don't want films which are commercial projects that are, predictable stories. You can guess what the dialogue is when they're going to say next. You can guess the ending. That's not what they're looking for. What they want is things which are much more edgy, innovative, groundbreaking, risk-taking, are scared to take that risk. Those kind of filmmakers, that's what they want, and that's what they're really looking for nowadays. So that's what I always recommend to filmmakers is to think about what kind of film you've got. If it's a mainstream product, that's not a festival film. But if it's something that's very different and very out there and a bit more of an edge to it, and that goes for short films and feature films and documentaries, that's what festivals want.
What would be considered a mainstream film? I mean, aside from the obvious DC Comics or James Bond.
Yeah. That would be some of the obvious, yeah. So, your Tom Cruise films, your Jean-Claude Van Damme films. So the kind of a mainstream film is very much, it's predictable, but you could enjoy it because it's predictable. And they kind of speak to like a more broader audience who aren't particularly ones who are looking to go into like deeper kind of films and films that challenge their minds or films that make them think outside the box. Mainstream is very safe. It's vanilla, so to speak. There's nothing bad with that. That's good. If that's a good to the audience. It's great. Like seeing something like 10 Things I Hate About You, a fluffy rom-com. They're good for on a plane journey, for example. But they're not really festival films. So the mainstream is, boy meets girl, boy gets the girl, they live happily ever after. There might be a fight in between, but we know what's going to happen. That's what a commercial kind of movie would be.
So give me an example of a more non-commercial film.
So a good example of a non-commercial film would be a film that launched at Sundance Film Festival back in the 80s was Steven Soderbergh's Sex, Lies and Videotape.
Oh,
so
yeah.
in that film, it's got actors at the time who were a little bit up and coming, like James Spade and the guy from the OC, Sandy. But it wasn't particularly a mainstream film because it had a big twist. It was very much pushing the boundaries. It was, very, shall we say, taking a bit of a risk in terms of what would normally go through to be passed to the the cinemas at that time. It had raunchy advertising. It was very biting dialogue for its time. A film like that is a really good example of what a festival film is and what a non-commercial film is. It has, some familiar faces. Obviously, people recognize people in that film at the time, Andy McDowell, obviously. But they weren't, say, mega big Hollywood stars doing big, dumb movies like, say, the Tom Cruise kind of movies, which are big, dumb fun and really good. But they were actors who were just a little bit more under the radar. And the film is not a particularly mainstream narrative. As I said, it's really biting, has a massive twist no one saw coming, takes its risks, but it's a really good piece of work. So that is a good example. And also that won Sundance Film Festival, and that obviously launched Steven Soderbergh's career. And that director did, some films which are a little bit more mainstream, but he also did some more festival films like Schizophilus, where he directed himself, which was interesting. Then he does the mainstream Oceans 11, 12 and 13, I think it was, Out of Sight, and other ones as well, which are more like not really get a big release because they weren't particularly very, mainstream friendly. So that's a really good example. He's a great director as a festival film director.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about what you do specifically.
Yep.
If I'm a filmmaker, I've got a film, I want to get it out there, I come to you, and then what are you going to do?
So what we do is we look very closely at the film. So we have to kind of assess if it is a festival film first and foremost. And what that means is, we have to check that it's up to the kind of standards the festival would want. You have to have good sound. You have to have good acting. It has to be good, decent length. You also have to have on board making sure that you have obviously a good director that can direct well. It doesn't matter too much about the money spent or the budget. That's irrelevant. It's more about how well what has been made, how well you've done with what you've been made, how well you've done with what you've made, basically. So it hasn't got to be made for like millions. It can be made for a lot less than that. We've had a film that's made for a very small amount of money. but it's all about the execution. So it's I have to assess the film first. Is it what festivals want? Is it the kind of story? Is it the kind of execution? Is it the kind of product that they're after? If it is, then we can definitely start working together. And then we help the client get their films seen around the world at festivals by getting the best plan together and the best strategy.
To try and give somebody an idea, would you be considered a PR rep?
Well, PR is more getting magazines, etc., and articles on television. That's what PR really is.
Media,
yeah. So with us, people do think of it as PR because it's getting exposure, but it's not the PR in the normal kind of sense. So really, what I work in is distribution, and then we do have people that we can speak with externally. Who are really good people that are publicists, and then they come on board separately for separate fee with the client to get those magazine interviews, to get those radio interviews, to get those publications interested, etc., so on and so forth.
So you would be a DR instead of a PR.
Yeah. I like that. That's a new one. No one said that. I'm a DR. I like a doctor. I'm a DR. DR.
Distribution representative. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So, which is really good. Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of publicity, as I mentioned, it's quite different to distribution, but festivals have become a very important resource and tool for filmmakers to get their film seen, because obviously festivals are cheaper than doing a big release by yourself, which would cost a lot of money.
I've heard a lot of stories, both good and bad, from filmmakers. And most of the bad stories I've heard, unfortunately, have been in the distribution area, where there are very unscrupulous people out there who are taking a lot of money, promising massive distribution, and then nothing happens. I'm sure you've heard some stories as well.
Oh, yes, all the time. Yes, I'm very familiar with that.
So what kind of advice would you give to an unsuspecting filmmaker as far as what to avoid in terms of distribution deals you do not want?
Yeah. So a distribution deal that you do not want is one is where they take lots of money from you in terms of what they believe they spend on advertising. So they might say, you have to cap the expenses. So when they say we're going to spend, £10,000 on advertising the film, then I take that out of your sales revenue. So it's important that you make sure that that cap is not too high and is a reasonable kind of, cap on the expenses and limit, maybe a couple of thousand, not 10, for example, if it's a small movie. And also what I would suggest too is to get the contract read by a lawyer, but also get some money up front, because no guarantee you would see any more funds after that is the issue. So you see what I mean? So it has to be a case of that you get some money up front to put in your pocket for a return on investment, because you might not guarantee, you don't know how much it will sell. I mean, it might sell really well and get watched a lot during coronavirus in the pandemic, or it might not, or it might get swamped. It might never get seen. So you have to make sure you get some bit of cash up front. You can then keep going forwards and then see what revenue comes in. If it's a lot, then great. If it's not, you've got money up front. But get a lawyer to check it, because there are lots of T's and C's and clauses you have to be careful of, which is making sure that the key thing is to make sure that you get paid and that you're going to get a fair amount and it's a fair commission split.
You did mention something about budget, and I wanted to hit on that again, because I've always been amazed at some of the films that I've seen, indie films, and when I ask the filmmaker, what was the budget for this film? And they come in with this ridiculously small amount of money, and I'm just blown away by what a beautiful film they could make for $50,000.
Oh, no, absolutely.
It's unbelievable to me. But I think a lot of that is, some of that is just the cheap of the technology these days, right? With the cameras being as cheap as they are and editing software and things. But there still is the skill of the filmmaker, the cameras, the shots, the angles, the editing. All of that is still the skill that has to be there, correct?
Yes, and that's what it boils down to in the end. It is all about the skill, the talent. As I said, it doesn't matter about the budget, it doesn't matter about the equipment, it doesn't matter how much you got it for. I mean, a lot of people do things on favors because of the strength of the script. They do things for show, they do things because they love the product and who's going to be working with them. They want to jump at the opportunity. They're very keen to something like that, So yes, it's all about the talent. That's what it boils down to. Money is irrelevant. I mean, I've had a film that was shot for like 12K, a feature film, and it looked a lot more than that. And other films I've got, like one now we've got on the circuit called Marcus, that was made for like, and that was probably under 10K, and it looks stunning. You know, everything about it is because everyone worked for reduced fee, everybody worked for next to nothing, or they got equipment hired free, or they won here and there. You know, so like the basics, and because of the script is very strong, and it's a beautiful film that's doing really well. So that's how. It
is really about the story, and it seems to me that the major studios now are concentrating much less on story.
Oh yeah, they are. Yeah. It's about spectacle. Story is the background. It's in the background, the story. But I mean, that's okay with a mainstream film because it can be about, you know, the basic story, and then they enjoy the rest of it, the stunts, the stars. Right. There's a lot of appeal. But with festival films, it's the opposite. So it's not so much about that.
Well, I found it interesting because I watched the one before the last one, I think, the James Bond film with Daniel Craig. And I swear he had about 4 pages of dialogue in the entire film.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's right. Yes, that's true. He would have done. Yeah. I mean, the Bond's look is very much now minimalistic, very minimalistic.
Yeah.
But yeah, he does it well.
Oh, he does it very well, and I enjoyed the film, but it just amazed me that, you know, there was the plot and everything was predictable, as all James Bond films are, but it just amazed me how little he spoke. And I thought, wow, he could have memorized his lines in a half an hour.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, we do have to kind of wind this down. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Yes. So my website is RebekahLouisaSmith.com. On there you can find everything about what I do, who I am, my book, my businesses, and it's all on there. I'd love for you to take a look and connect.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. It was nice meeting you.
Thank you.
Talking to you.
You too. Great conversation, and I'll follow you on Insta and we'll stay in touch.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on The Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Love coffee, huh? But wait a minute. It seems like every time you finish a cup of coffee, you get all of these side effects along with it. Heartburn, indigestion, upset stomach, acid reflux. As the world's first and only organic acid-free coffee, Tyler's Coffee is able to provide a healthier option in the solution for more than 100 million individuals who have sensitive stomachs or suffer from acid-related modalities. This is Tyler's acid-free coffee. Coffee without the consequences.
Hi, this is John Morgan, production supervisor for DJC Productions. You're listening to The Douglas Coleman Show.
Okay, please welcome to The Douglas Coleman Show, Kevin Eikenberry. Hi, Kevin. How are you?
I'm great. Glad to be with you.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. So your organization is called Remote Leadership Institute. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's an organization that I co-founded a number of years ago, and we're in the business of helping organizations and leaders figure out how to make remote work really work.
Okay. I had a couple of other people on my show with the same thing. So I think obviously, and especially with COVID, it has brought into the spotlight the sort of necessity, I suppose, for remote working, yeah? Yeah,
there were lots of folks that were working remotely part or all of the time before last March, Douglas, but clearly, when powers that be said, we're going to send everybody home unless you can't do your work there, it forced everyone to look at it. And I think the future looks far more varied and far more flexible than it did in the past. We'll have more people working remotely and from home in the future than we ever did before.
Okay, well, there's some people that can't work remotely. I mean, like firefighters and police officers and doctors. Well, doctors can do some.
So doctors can do some, but if you're working in a warehouse, right, or if you're working on a manufacturing line, there's obviously lots of folks that can't. That's right. For sure.
What do you suppose the percentages of people that are currently not working remote that could?
Well, I think right now the percentages of people that aren't that could is very low. I think in most parts of the country, as we're speaking, many people are being mandated to still do that. And I think that right now, the lion's share of folks that could are. There are some organizations and some of our clients that have a few people coming back in where their governors have allowed for that to have a little more flexibility. For the most part, I think that the lion's share of folks that could be working remotely currently are. And again, future will move some people back into the office, but I think the office environment is going to be very different in the future than it was in the past.
Are we behind other countries in terms of remote learning, or are we cutting edge, or where are we in respect to Europe or Japan, South Korea, places like that?
I think that you asked remote learning. I'll answer remote learning and remote work. I think that we have been, and again, I think if we take the COVID effect out of it, Douglas, which forced us to do it, right? I would say that in the remote learning area, we probably were behind. Whether that will remain the case, I don't know that I'm an expert enough to say about that. But in terms of remote work, I think we were largely with or ahead of the trend before. And I think that while there's lots of folks that are challenged with doing their jobs remotely, and we could certainly get way better at it, I think lots of leaders were pleasantly surprised that when they were forced to send people home, that it went better than they had originally thought.
I did bring up remote learning, which may not be exactly in what you're doing, but I did want to get your take on it because I've had somebody else on the show that I got into a disagreement about it. Not fist fight or anything, but just a constructive criticism, argument, debate, whatever you want to call it.
Well, if you
go ahead, I just
sorry.
wanted to get your take.
Well, I was going to say we're doing remote learning every day and have been long before the pandemic in terms of our work with clients, right? But a lot of times, or most of the time, when people are asking the remote learning question, they're thinking about K-12. Younger kids, right. And I think there's definitely concerns there. I think that what we're doing now in the current time is our kids are not where they would have been if there hadn't been a pandemic, right? That I think that we've got some real challenges about how there's some learning gaps. I think from where we thought kids would be a year ago and where they are today. I think there's some real truth in that.
My thoughts on the deal was that for university level, for people who are going for bachelor's degrees or advanced degrees,
yep.
I think it's wonderful because I was around when the first online stuff back in the early 90s, mid-90s.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, this is great, because for people that are in their 30s and 40s who maybe want to go back and get an advanced degree, but they're working full-time, so they can do this at night, on the weekends when it's convenient for them. I thought that's super, absolutely great. My problem was with the K-12 because not only is it going to require one of the parents to stay home and babysit, which in these days most parents work, both of them work. That's a big problem. The other problem is that it doesn't give a break to the parents who can send their kids off to school for 6 hours and have time to do what they're going to do. And the other problem is the socialization aspect of it. It's important that kids at that age socialize with other kids, other adults other than their parents. And I don't know. I didn't like it. See, he was all real gung-ho about, the K-12 has got to be, had got to go online.
Well, this is not going to make good radio because we're in agreement. But I would say that there's a couple things that you said I just would highlight. And one is that, for that bachelor's degree for that more advanced learning, and for corporate training and learning, which is the world that we live in, there are tremendous opportunities, and we can do it exceptionally well. But I think that the other issues outside of the classroom experience itself for that K-12, especially the younger we go, that all the stuff that you said, I would agree with 100%, that there are real challenges there. And I don't think we had, and I'm not picking on anybody at this point, but we didn't have teachers prepared to do it either, right? Which didn't help with where we're at over the last several months.
Well, that's true. Okay, so let's get back to your company. Now, what is the Long Distance Teammate? Is that your book title, or what is that exactly?
Yeah, that's the new book that we've just finished, called The Long Distance Teammate: Stay Engaged and Connected While Working Anywhere. And the big idea here is, and it kind of goes with what we were talking about schools. The big idea is there's a big difference between working from home and being an effective teammate. And too often what's happening is the longer, Douglas, that people work from home, the more they see their work as their work, their task list, their things to do, as opposed to seeing themselves as a part of this broader system of a team, and recognizing that there's still need to collaborate, there's still need to communicate, there's still need to create synergy across the group. And so the book is meant to help people stay connected, stay engaged, and still be highly productive. So it's a book to help people both today and in the long term of their careers as well.
So if I was a company that was looking to set up remote, I would call you. What would you guys do?
Well, there's a couple things. If organizations are saying, hey, we're going to send our people home to work remotely, which of course everyone did it all at one time last March, we can certainly help people think about what do they need to be doing in terms of creating the communication strategies, in terms of communicating with each other during the change and then after the change. But our work comes more in how to help leaders lead when they can't see their people every day, and to help team members be effective and be productive, as well as to still collaborate and communicate when they're not in the same location.
Okay, let's unpack that one a little bit more. So you work primarily with like the CEOs of companies that would be considering going remote to help them transition to that?
Sometimes we might work we might be brought in for different folks in the organization, but typically if we're coming in to help make the organizational change, we would come in at a C-suite level or something relatively high to help them. You know, we're not going to be able to help you think about your technology needs and your broadband needs and all of those things, but rather to think about the people systems, right? So yes, we would be brought in by someone higher in the organization that's thinking about how to do this. And now that people had to do it, the conversations are much more about what does re-entry look like? What do we want the future of our work to look like? How many people are we going to want to work from home, allow to work from home? How many days a week do we want them in the office, and all those things. And so it raises a whole new set of challenges and questions about what does the future of work look like. And that's where we would help organizations at this point.
Can you give me an example?
An example of?
Okay, let's say that I'm the CEO. And what are you going to tell me? Or because I don't even know what questions I'd be asking you at this point.
So I would actually start by not telling, but by asking myself. I want to learn a lot about why they're making the change, what the reasons that they see to make the change are, and to understand their culture enough so we can see how we can best help them. Because if we go back to last March, organizations that had strong organizational cultures, when they sent people home, were far more successful than those who weren't doing so well before they sent people home, right? So I would be asking questions about culture, about purpose for the change, and I'd be trying to make sure I understand where their leaders are in terms of supporting that change, because until we know those things, I don't even know where we would start to help them. But once we have a sense of what's going on organizationally, then we have a chance to start to think about what do they need to do to be more successful, what buttons do they need to push, what conversations do they need to have, and how do we literally help them make the change be successful, getting people engaged and committed to that change.
Well, right off the bat, I'm thinking the pros are pretty obvious. Number one, you could save a fortune in real estate, because if you had a good number of your employees working from home, you don't need to have an office anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Number two,
or much less space, right?
Or much less, right? Exactly. The environmental benefits, that people don't have to drive, they're not polluting, there's less people on the roads. Okay, all of that. The utility bills. Okay, financially, I could see that this is a great savings for the company, right?
You got it. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So what are the cons? Are there any?
Well, I think I'll start by saying it does depend a lot on the nature of the work. It depends on the vision of the leaders. But if we get past some of those, if we say everything else being equal, what are the cons? Well, the cons are we're going to have to really learn how to work differently. We're going to have to really learn how to communicate more effectively, which we're not very good at to start with. And we're going to have to really help our team members deal with work-life balance. Because the thought is, if we send everybody home, they'll get more done. Well, if they cocoon themselves and don't communicate with anybody else, they might, but they're not getting the collaboration accomplished. And what's really happened, Douglas, for a lot of folks is they basically traded their commute time for more hours of work. And they're not necessarily getting more done. They're just spending more time doing it. So they're not truly being more productive, right? So in the short term, the organization says, hey, that's fine. We're still getting our work done, but it's not sustainable over the long haul. So we're going to have to really help people understand. We're going to have to set better boundaries. We're going to have to help people think through how to create work-life balance so we don't have people burned out and stressed. And we also have a huge issue around loneliness and isolation, which was a serious problem in this country, Douglas, before we had a pandemic. And it's certainly not gotten better when people can't go out and be with other people. And the number one place people find community and where people find relationships and friends is in the workplace. And so long-term, societally, that's a downside that we'll have to figure out how to deal with. It can be done. And once we get past lockdowns and pandemics, we can start to think about it. But as leaders, we're to think about downsides and the long-term health of our organizations and our people. Those are some of the things we have to be thinking about.
I think the distraction factor is kind of a trade-off, because if you're at home, you're going to be distracted by your kids, your dog, your neighbors, your leaky faucet in the bathroom that meant to be fixed. On the other hand, if you're in the office, you can get distracted by the guy who always comes up and talks to you and says, hey, did you see that movie last week? The football game, whatever.
The distractions are different, right?
Yeah, they're different.
The distractions are just different.
Yeah.
And if we're susceptible to them and have trouble staying focused, we're still going to have that challenge when we're at home. There are a different set of challenges, and we have to equip. If we're talking about for ourselves, we have to start to think about how do we make sure we stay focused, right? And again, hard to give blanket answers to that because everyone's situation is different. Are they home literally by themselves? Are they working at the north end of their kitchen table? Do they have a separate space to work? Do they have 3 kids in the house? Like, all of those things change those dynamics. But the reality is figuring out how to deal with distractions is key to our success, regardless of where we are. And as you said, at home, they're just different distractions.
Right, exactly. So your book, Long Distance Teammate, is basically, it covers this. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it really is meant to be a practical guide to help anyone who's finding themselves working remotely, how they can be more successful at it, both personally, like the things we're just now talking about, as well as interpersonally with the rest of the members of their team, and how to help them find the way to still feel like they're doing meaningful work rather than just collecting a paycheck, right? And then lastly, helping them think about how they build their career long-term when they may not be interacting with people in the way they used to in the office. So it's meant to be a practical guide for us personally, as well as interpersonally in the team, as well as thinking about our future in a new world of work.
And the book is out and available?
The book is available on January the 19th, and people can buy it anywhere they buy their books, or they can go to longdistanceteammate.com to learn much more.
Is that your website? Do you have a website for the company as well?
That's the website for the book, longdistanceteammate.com. You can also go to remoteleadershipinstitute.com, as we talked about at the start of the conversation.
Well, Kevin, we got to wrap this up. Thanks so much for coming on the show. This was interesting. Best of luck.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
With your company. How long have you been in business?
27 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The remote piece of the work isn't all that we do, but it's a large piece of what we do. And so we started the business about 27 years ago.
Well, you were at the infancy of the internet 27 years ago. That was before Facebook.
I had a fax machine, Douglas.
Wow. Oh, that's great. Good for you. All right. Well, thanks for coming on the show again, and best of luck.